The first thing I did after getting a second chance at life was make up an excuse to put off getting a marriage license with Thomas Cameron. I end my previous life, the day I found out I was pregnant. Thomas flew overseas with Alexandra Wilkerson and vanished for 20 years. Later, when I was dying of late-stage stomach cancer, he finally came back. Staring at Alexandra's photos on his phone, he said to me, "If I had driven slower on the way to get our marriage license that day, maybe things would have turned out differently." The second I realized I had been reborn, Thomas was sitting on my couch, waiting for me to grab my ID so we could head out. I lied that there was an issue with a batch of fabric at my studio and sent him to wait at City Hall. As soon as his car pulled away, I walked downstairs to the corner cafe. I grabbed a seat by the window, ordered an iced Americano, and basked in the sun. The owner, Gracie Collins, brought over my coffee and asked, all curious, "Weren't you supposed to get your marriage license with Mr. Cameron today? What are you doing here by yourself?" I took a sip of the bitter coffee and smiled at her. I had an awful nightmare last night, and I woke up with a bad feeling in my gut. She tried to make me feel better. Dreams always work the opposite way. You and Mr. Cameron are gonna have nothing but good times once you're married. Don't let some silly nightmare spook you. I froze for a second, then smiled and nodded. You're right. I'll just sit here for a bit, then I'll leave. Marrying Thomas? Not happening this time around. I end my previous life. We had just grabbed our marriage license and were walking out of the hall together when we bumped right into a girl clutching a pile of papers. She was Alexandra, a new intern the company had just hired. On the ride home that day, Thomas was weirdly quiet. I assumed that he was just settling into the whole husband thing, acting all mature and responsible. He fell head over heels for Alexandra right then and there. His silence that day wasn't about being mature at all. He was full of regrets, wishing he'd put off marrying me for just one more day. From that day on, Thomas got way colder with me. He'd stand on the balcony by himself, smoking and spacing out. Every time I asked what was wrong, he'd get snappy and change the subject. After getting turned down enough times, plus dealing with all the chaos of getting my studio off the ground, I stopped asking. I figured I'd just wait for him to get over whatever weird phase he was in. Later, when the company went overseas, he was sent to the European office. We had to do the long-distance thing, and I thought it was just some temporary strategic move, but with every reshuffle that followed, he somehow always ended up staying overseas. I complained to him about it once, and he just said, "Gotta think about the bigger picture." Then one meeting at headquarters changed everything. I overheard some HR execs talking and realized that only the very first transfer had been the company's decision. For the next 5 years, Thomas had been the one constantly requesting the higher-ups to keep him overseas. That day, I lost it on him over the phone. Afterward, he said sorry, but wouldn't give me a single reason why. When I hung up, I knew this marriage was toast. Life had a way of surprising me. I got pregnant. When Thomas found out, his whole attitude flipped. For the first time ever, he took a long leave and flew back home, suddenly all over me with care. He'd clumsily follow recipes to make me soup, press his ear against my belly to listen for the baby, and walk with me every day without fail. Then one day, he vanished. I asked everyone he knew and pulled every string I had. No one knew where he had gone, and no one could tell me whether he was alive or dead. I toughed it out and buried both our parents, all by myself. I figured he was dead, but right when I was dying, there he was, all suited up, standing in my hospital room. That was when it finally hit me. All those 20 years he vanished, he had been living overseas with Alexandra right there beside him. They adopted a girl and spoiled her rotten. But Alexandra was always sick, and she died of illness a while back. Her only dying wish was to wear a wedding dress for Thomas the way it was meant to be. Thomas told me he owed me, but he hated me even more. I thought it was the biggest joke ever. If he didn't love me, why didn't he just say so back then? He could have tossed divorce papers in my face and given Alexandra her proper title. Instead, he walked out on his newborn daughter and didn't give a damn about his own parents. And now he had the balls to hate me. I raised Lillian with all my heart and soul, yet she coldly said she was jealous of Alexandra's adopted daughter. the one who got all the love in the world. She blamed me for selfishly bringing her into a fatherless family without asking her first. Only then did I realize that all those nights I had stayed up drawing blueprints to pay for her upbringing, she had secretly added her dad on WhatsApp and hidden it from me. Without so much as a flicker of guilt, I sat in the cafe for a full hour. Then I paid the bill, walked out, and grabbed a cab to City Hall. I had just reached the bottom of the steps when I saw Thomas bending down to help Alexandra up off the ground. His eyes were glued to her face, totally mesmerized, his furrowed brows smoothed out. Pure unfiltered amazement written all over his face. In my previous life, I rushed over to help gather Alexandra's scattered papers, never even noticing Thomas losing it like that. Stepping outside the role I once played, I could finally see how glaringly absurd it all was. Tommy, I'm all done. Hope I didn't keep you waiting too long. The second Thomas heard me, his back went stiff. When he turned, his eyes betrayed a flicker of unmistakable panic. Oh, Cecilia, hey. I was just... I caught it right away. When Alexandra looked at me, there was something way more complicated in her eyes than in my previous life, perhaps even tinged with jealousy and resentment. But when I looked again, she had switched to that sweet, helpless act. Like I had imagined the whole thing. I was curious. This time around, our marriage license hadn't been stamped yet, and Thomas had already bumped into his destined one. So what would he do? Was he going to come clean with me and go chase Alexandra? Or would he play the same old game, stuck with me in name only while out there acting like she was his one true love? Our number is almost up. Let's get this done, I said, faking eagerness. Thomas's face went white as a sheet. Alexandra sucked in a sharp breath, right on cue to break the tense silence. My ankle is killing me. Last time around, she never twisted her ankle, but this time, she was injured, and the timing was suspiciously perfect. Was she reborn, too? I narrowed my eyes, checking her out, but couldn't read a thing. Without a word, Thomas scooped her up and ran straight to the hospital across the street. After examining her, the ER doctor said it was just a mild sprain. An ice pack at home would be enough. Alexandra kept her head down, cheeks flushed, while Thomas's eyes were glowing with barely hidden delight. Coming out of the hospital, we walked right past City Hall. Thomas looked at me, torn up inside. Cecilia, with everything that happened today, we're probably too late now. How about we pick a better day? I said calmly, yeah, sure. Marriage isn't something you rush into anyway. This time around, that better day would never come for him. I smiled at that thought. He looked like a massive weight had just been lifted off his shoulders, finally able to breathe easy. All right, I'll book another slot. Thomas had driven his Cayenne today. On the way back, Alexandra naturally reached for the passenger door. He glanced at me, awkward, but didn't stop her. I acted like I didn't see. I walked straight to the curb and flagged down a cab. Both cars stopped side by side at the red light. Through my window, I could hear them talking from the next lane. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard Alexandra's joyful tone and Thomas's low chuckle, the one he thought he was hiding. I couldn't even remember the last time he laughed like that. In my previous life, after he met Alexandra, he never smiled at me again, but now, I genuinely didn't care. We stopped at the office building during lunch break. The coworkers saw Alexandra climb out of Thomas's passenger seat. She coquettishly pouted, asking him to grab her bag. When they looked at me, just stepping out of the cab, their eyes were swimming with awkward pity. I knew exactly what they were thinking, but I just flashed them a big smile and walked straight into the building. To get ready for our wedding, Thomas paid cash for a riverside villa downtown 6 months ago. Most of my personal stuff was already moved in. That afternoon, I was heading to a client meeting and happened to pass by that upscale complex. I had the driver pull over and stared up at the familiar building. In my previous life, I walked through the door after getting our marriage license and saw the place decked out in flowers and balloons. My heart was warm and fuzzy, but the groom-to-be, who was setting up our place himself just the day before, felt like an empty shell on our wedding night. That night, and countless nights that followed, we lay back to back on that huge bed, doing absolutely nothing. Yet neither of us could fall asleep. Instead of going back to the villa, I headed straight to my rented studio apartment. I pushed open the door, dug to the bottom of my safe, and pulled out a transfer letter with the company seal. Stamped on it was an offer to study at a top design school in Milan, plus a promotion to core design director at headquarters. In my previous life, I turned this down so I could be a good wife to Thomas. A few months later, he left for overseas. Then I got pregnant, and he vanished completely. I was left alone, scrambling to pay medical bills to keep his parents alive while raising Lillian. I couldn't keep up at work. My creative spark had fizzled out, and they shuffled me off to do grunt work. I never once got a promotion or a raise. Lillian was in middle school by then. She'd look at my tired, sallow face with pure disgust every time I stayed up late. "Other moms dress so nicely," she said. "Look at you. You're like some bitter housewife. Why can't you have even a little pride, like everyone else?" "Like who?" "Alexandra, the woman her dad kept overseas." The more I replayed it, the more my blood ran cold. Lillian had seen photos of Alexandra back then, and maybe even kept in touch with her behind my back. Yet, she had kept her dad's secret from me for 5 whole years. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. Asterisk at dinner time. Thomas didn't order takeout for me like he usually did. I headed downstairs alone to that salad place near the office we always went to. The second I walked in, I saw him sitting across from Alexandra, their heads together over the same menu. Whatever he said had her giggling behind her hand. When he looked up and saw me, he froze, then shot to his feet. "Cecilia? What are you doing here?" Alexa just moved out of the dorms and hasn't unpacked yet. I'm grabbing her a quick bite, and I was gonna get you something to go. I didn't expect you to get off work this early." "Early?" The place was almost empty, and their signature salad was already sold out. I couldn't help but think back to my previous life. After we got back from City Hall, Thomas said he'd pick up dinner from the restaurant. But I waited on an empty stomach until deep into the night before he finally showed up. He walked in with nothing, looking wiped out. "They closed early. Just grab whatever." That night, the huge, empty villa was so quiet I could hear my stomach cramping. Even back then. He was already head over heels for Alexandra. I didn't say a word and walked right past Thomas. I grabbed some pasta from the front desk and took it back to my place. I had barely gotten halfway through when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Thomas standing there, and Alexandra was right behind him. He looked at me, a mix of emotions on his face, and cleared his throat awkwardly. "Cecilia, we need to talk about something." I watched Thomas put on his little show without saying a word. He looked back at Alexandra, all shy and nervous. When he turned back to me, he tried to sound firm. "Cecilia, look, Alexa is fresh out of school. She doesn't know anyone in this city. The place she rented has too much formaldehyde, and she can't live there. We haven't made it official yet, and that Riverside villa is sitting there empty, so I thought she could stay there for a few days." I glanced at Alexandra. There she was, huddled behind Thomas like some terrified deer. 2 lifetimes. 2 totally different acts. I'd have to be an idiot to think she wasn't reborn too, but I wasn't about to waste my time on her drama. I had dumped Thomas like yesterday's trash. Whatever show she wanted to put on, I couldn't care less. Fine by me. "Your name is on the deed. Your call." Thomas clearly didn't see that coming. He had a whole speech ready, and now it died in his throat. I added, "But I'm a bit of a neat freak. I can't stand it when people touch my stuff, so I'll swing by tonight and grab it." He froze for a second, then quickly reached out to stop me. "No need for all that trouble. I'll pack it into the guest room." So he wasn't just letting Alexandra stay at our place. He was letting her sleep in our bed. The sheer gall made me want to puke. I saw that smirk flash across Alexandra's face. As soon as they left, I picked at the pasta, then grabbed a cab straight to the villa. I shoved open the master bedroom door. There was Thomas, hunched over, carefully making the bed for Alexandra with the fancy silk set I had custom ordered for our wedding. Hearing the commotion, he spun around, eyes wide in shock. "Cecilia? What are you doing here?" I said I had packed your stuff into the guest room. "Uh-huh." I didn't even look his way. I turned and headed for the walk-in closet to grab my suitcase. He rushed after me, some weird mess of emotions swimming in his eyes. "Cecilia, Just then, Alexandra padded out of the master bedroom in her slippers. Tommy, that silk set was for you and Cecilia's wedding, right? Maybe I shouldn't sleep on it. I'm not that picky. I'll just sleep on the couch. She got more whiny with every word. I saw the way Thomas looked at her, like he was about to burst with how much he felt for her. He turned back to me. Cecilia, look, we haven't had time to buy extra sheets, so this set, no way. I missed that flash of smugness in Alexandra's eyes. Too bad for her, I had already dumped this bastard the second I opened my eyes in this life. I shrugged, playing it cool. I paid for it with your black card. Do whatever you want with it. Thanks, Cecilia. Thanks, Tommy. Wow, I can't believe it. I'm just an intern fresh out of college, and yet here I am, staying in Mr. Cameron's luxurious villa and sleeping in a bed like this. She spoke with a sweet, manipulative tone. Even Thomas caught the weird vibe, but he just stared at me, feeling out how far he could push. Alexandra must have sensed she had oversold it. She quickly covered her mouth and pretended to be flustered. Sorry, Cecilia. Please don't get the wrong idea. Tommy is just my boss, I swear. I'll take the couch. Thomas grabbed her arm. Watching this farce, I smiled and said, it's fine. Go ahead and sleep soundly. It's just a set of bed sheets. Thomas couldn't read anything from my face. He stood there, his expression darkening. I was too busy counting my jewelry to pay him any attention. Alexandra's little guilty act was nothing but an attempt to make me lose my temper so that Thomas would think I was being unreasonable. But I'd been reborn, and why would I play along with her? Lucky for her that in my previous life, she'd never dared to act this boldly in front of me. But this time, since she wanted to show off so badly, I'd let her have her way. I walked over to Alexandra and whispered in her ear, Alexandra, right? You're way too dramatic. Why would I be jealous? It's only natural that Tommy cares about you. Even if he made you his wife, I wouldn't mind. But I doubt he has the guts to marry you. After saying that, I gave her a smile. Alexandra's face turned deathly pale instantly. She couldn't understand how I could be so different from the timid woman she knew in her previous life. But soon, she seemed to remember some trump cards she still had, and her gaze turned arrogant again. After stuffing the last coat into the suitcase, I clicked across the floor in my heels, dragging the case toward the door. Suddenly, Thomas called out to me from behind. He strode over, reaching out to grab the handle of my suitcase, but I jerked away sharply. I was not kidding this time. Alexandra had been reborn, too. In my previous life, she'd been Thomas's secret mistress for her entire life, and this time, she was brazenly trying to take my place. She took Thomas as her treasure, but I was going to get as far away from this disgusting scumbag as I could. Thomas stared at his empty hand, his eyes telling me that he felt hurt. Cecilia, what on earth are you upset about? If you're bothered by this, I can explain it to you right now. That was a first. In my previous life, he'd let me waste away for years and never bothered to explain anything to me. Now, he was actually saying he'd like to give me an explanation, but I could guess his excuse easily. He was just hiding behind, mentoring a junior while cheating on me emotionally. Explain? That would be pointless. And the woman inside wasn't about to let him anyway. It hurts. It went just as I expected. A scream came from the master bedroom. Thomas tensed up immediately. Without even glancing at me, he rushed back inside like a madman. I scoffed, pushed open the front door, and stepped into the elevator. In my previous life, I'd been tied to Thomas for 21 years. I died at 45. That was definitely an early death. When I gave birth to that little troublemaker, I almost bled to death and even lost my uterus. My health was completely destroyed from that surgery on. Later, without a break, I had to take care of the baby all by myself. At the same time, I had to deal with Thomas's mean, picky parents, too, every day. I dragged my sick body through late nights working while desperately searching for Thomas. Just raising my daughter to 20 had exhausted me. Since Thomas went missing, I hadn't slept a full night in 20 years, but now I'd been reborn. I never signed that marriage contract. I wasn't wasting my life in endless misery anymore. And also, I had a healthy body. Finally, I could sleep soundly through the night. It was a dreamless sleep, and it was the first time I'd slept this soundly in 2 lifetimes. Early the next morning, I knocked on my boss's office door and handed him the confirmation form for my further study program in Milan. My boss was surprised. "Didn't you flat out turn this down before? Said you didn't want to be in a long-distance relationship with Mr. Cameron." I shook my head. "I'm not going to marry him. Right now, my career is the most important thing to me." My boss stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled approvingly. In my previous life, my boss had tried to talk sense into me. He'd said, "A gift like yours deserves a world stage, and you shouldn't be stuck in trivial household chores." It was my own love-struck foolishness that ruined my promising future. I asked my boss to keep my schedule confidential for the time being. Then, I booked a direct flight to Milan for next week. When I left the company, I passed by that upscale riverside residential area. The light turned red, and I glanced to the side. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows on the second floor, I saw Thomas and Alexandra standing on the balcony. Thomas naturally pulled out a tissue and wiped the milk stain from the corner of Alexandra's mouth. Alexandra looked up at him. Her eyes filled with love. It seemed that just staying in the same room had been enough for them to lay open their feelings for each other. The light turned green, and I stepped on the gas. The sound of the engine caught the attention of the people on the balcony. When Thomas saw my license plate, his face turned deathly pale, and he pulled his hand back quickly and instinctively. I coldly looked away, not caring at all what that guilty man was thinking. Back at my apartment, I started sorting out my assets. I didn't need to take much for the overseas trip. I cashed in all my designer bags and jewelry. As for the things I couldn't take, I donated them all. Looking at the empty room, I felt an unprecedented sense of ease. My previous life had been an endless suffering. But this time, I planned to only be good to myself. By the time I finished sorting out my assets, it was almost dark. I'd been so busy all day that I hadn't even had any water, and my stomach started to rumble. I drove to an exclusive private restaurant downtown, the same place where Thomas and I first made our relationship official. In my previous life, my boss had tried to talk sense into me. He'd said, "A gift like yours deserves a world stage, and you shouldn't be stuck in trivial household chores." It was my own love-struck foolishness that ruined my promising future. I asked my boss to keep my schedule confidential for the time being. Then, I booked a direct flight to Milan for next week. When I left the company, I passed by that upscale riverside residential area. The light turned red, and I glanced to the side. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows on the second floor, I saw Thomas and Alexandra standing on the balcony. Thomas naturally pulled out a tissue and wiped the milk stain from the corner of Alexandra's mouth. Alexandra looked up at him. Her eyes filled with love. It seemed that just staying in the same room had been enough for them to lay open their feelings for each other. The light turned green, and I stepped on the gas. The sound of the engine caught the attention of the people on the balcony. When Thomas saw my license plate, his face turned deathly pale, and he pulled his hand back quickly and instinctively. I coldly looked away, not caring at all what that guilty man was thinking. Back at my apartment, I started sorting out my assets. I didn't need to take much for the overseas trip. I cashed in all my designer bags and jewelry. As for the things I couldn't take, I donated them all. Looking at the empty room, I felt an unprecedented sense of ease. My previous life had been an endless suffering. But this time, I planned to only be good to myself. By the time I finished sorting out my assets, it was almost dark. I'd been so busy all day that I hadn't even had any water, and my stomach started to rumble. I drove to an exclusive private restaurant downtown, the same place where Thomas and I first made our relationship official. Back then, it was at a cocktail party. We added each other on WhatsApp. Thomas, with his calm demeanor, was the kind of elite I admired, and he'd been impressed by my professional skills and looks. We'd gotten together naturally. We dated for 3 years. Though he wasn't perfect, he didn't have any major flaws. He'd take good care of me in daily life and help me smooth out problems at work. Our story wasn't one of thrilling passion. We fit and we got together. That was all. I thought we'd spend the rest of our lives in a decent, peaceful way. But I was wrong. He truly surprised me. Thomas proposed to me at the company's year-end party.at that time. His eyes were clearly filled with expectation and happiness. But in the end, time lost to novelty. Alexandra, a fresh out of college intern, hit his soft spot right on. His reason crumbled, and he felt that he'd found his so-called true love, but of all things, he should never have ruined my life with his selfish, silent treatment, pushing open the door to the private dining hall. I saw Thomas and Alexandra sitting in a corner booth right away. Alexandra noticed me at once, and she waved at me immediately. "Cecilia, are you here to eat? Why not join us? We'll have the waiter add one more set of tableware." Here she was, the woman who had been able to make a CEO abandon his wife for over 20 years. With 2 sentences, she'd made herself sound like Thomas's girlfriend, while I was just an outsider. Would that intrude on Mr. Cameron's good mood? I said, glancing at Thomas with a half smile. Thomas stood up, flustered, and pulled out a chair. "Cecilia, don't overthink it. Alexa said she'd never tried the food here before, so I brought her over. That's all." Of course, Alexandra got to play the innocent one again. I walked straight over and sat across from her. Looking at the table full of premium steaks and king crabs, I secretly gasped. This meal alone was probably 2 months' worth of Alexandra's salary. Thomas sure was generous to her. Alexandra picked up a piece of steak and put it on my plate. "Cecilia, try this." Tommy said the steak here is super tender, so he insisted I order it. He also said I'm too skinny and need to eat more, and this king crab. Oh. Tommy said he'll bake lobsters for me personally at his riverside villa when he's free this weekend. Thomas could cook. In my previous life, when I had morning sickness, he said he'd make me pasta, but he couldn't even boil the water properly. In the end, I had to do the cooking myself. Now, it seemed that he'd faked his love for me all along. I cut the steak slowly. It was indeed cooked just right. I focused on tasting the food, treating Alexandra like she was invisible. Suddenly, Alexandra burst into a fit of violent coughing. "Sorry, Cecilia, I choked on the soup. Where was I?" "Oh, right, Cecilia. Have you ever had Tommy's home-cooked food? If not, come over this weekend. He'll cook. Right, Tommy?" Choking on soup could be this dramatic. Clearly, Alexandra saw that neither kindness nor provocation worked on me, so she deliberately made a scene to get a rise out of me. I sneered in my heart. "Show off all you want. Go ahead, make a fool of yourself. Once I'm on that plane, there will be no one you can provoke." Then I remarked lightly, "You're so lucky, Alexandra. Mr. Cameron and I have known each other for years, but I never knew he could cook. You two just met a few days ago, and he's already willing to cook for you. Well, already can't wait for the treat this weekend." Alexandra had expected me to get jealous and lose my mind, but she never thought I'd just go along with her show. She froze completely. At the same time, Thomas's face turned flushed and then pale. I kept cutting my steak, not even glancing at them. When my low-fat salad arrived, I pushed it right in front of Alexandra, telling them to eat more greens to cool down. For the rest of the meal, the two of them remained completely quiet. Finally, I could enjoy my dinner in peace, walking out of the private restaurant. I said goodbye to them and got into my car. Then, I called my parents on video chat. In my previous life, after Thomas disappeared, I raised our daughter alone. I had to deal with his extremely picky parents, run my studio, and work nonstop every day at the same time. Thomas's parents didn't just refuse to help me take care of the baby. More than that, they kept bossing me around, making my life miserable. If I dared to resist even a little, they'd go make a scene at my studio. To get the money to raise my daughter, I had to put up with it. My parents felt terrible for me. They spent money and time helping me raise the child, and even asked around to find a good guy for me. But Thomas's parents went to my parents' villa and made a huge fuss, yelling that we were trying to drive them to their deaths. Worse, whenever someone decent asked me out, Thomas's mom would bring my daughter along. She would make the little girl cry and beg me not to abandon her. Later, rumors spread, and no one dared to introduce guys to me again, and I completely gave up on remarrying. Over those 20 years, because of the Cameron family, my parents suffered so much injustice. In their final moments, what weighed most on their hearts was all I had suffered in my life. the video call connected, after an entire lifetime apart. I now saw my parents' bright, healthy faces again, and tears rolled down my cheeks. Hearing my sobs, my parents immediately panicked. They thought Thomas had treated me badly, and they got angry, wanting to go to the Cameron group to demand an apology from Thomas right away. I quickly calmed them down, telling them everything that had happened in the past 2 days and my decision to call off the engagement. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Dad sighed and said that, as long as it was a decision I'd thought through carefully, he and Mom would always be my support. The tightness in my chest finally eased. I then told them about accepting the offer in Milan, and I had an early morning flight next Wednesday. Mom's eyes turned red with tears, and she said I must come home to stay for a few days before I left. When I got back to my apartment, the elevator door opened, and I saw Thomas sitting on my living room sofa, flipping through my design drafts. I almost forgot that I'd added his fingerprint to my apartment's keypad lock. Seeing that the drawer with the Milan transfer order was locked, I secretly sighed in relief. I didn't want any more trouble before I left. When Thomas saw me come in, he stood up and went to the kitchen to pour me a glass of warm water. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something. I leaned against the kitchen island, sipping the water slowly, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he couldn't hold it in anymore. "Cecilia, the things between Alexa and me really aren't what you think they are." I looked up at him, my voice completely calm. "What do you think I think they are?" Thomas was left tongue-tied. If I were the Cecilia Greer from my previous life, I would have believed any excuse he made, but those 20 years of torment had changed me. Now, his oaths meant nothing to me. On my deathbed in my previous life, he'd admitted it outright. He told me that he'd fallen in love with Alexandra at first sight, and she was her true love. I was the unwanted third wheel. "Cecilia, believe it or not, I only look after Alexandra because she just graduated and has no one. I'm just looking out for her as her senior." As Thomas explained, he subconsciously avoided my eyes. He couldn't even look me in the eye, and yet he was expecting me to believe him. But still, I smiled. "Okay, I believe you. Can you leave now?" "Oh, right. Close the door on your way out. I've already deleted your fingerprint. Don't come into my apartment without permission again." Thomas's expression froze on his face. He clearly hadn't expected me to cut ties with him so completely, with such a gentle tone. After Thomas left, I took out a wet wipe and wiped twice the spot on the sofa where he'd Saturday. I felt it was disgusting. After that, I started cleaning up the rest of the clutter in the living room. I wasn't going to renew the lease on this apartment, and there wasn't much stuff anyway. What really needed sorting out were the messy bills from the past 6 months. All from planning the wedding. I had to find a time to cut ties with Thomas completely, once and for all. Just as I was thinking that, the electronic doorbell rang. It was Thomas. He was holding a black bank card. As soon as I opened the door, he held it out to me eagerly. "Take this, Cecilia. The password is your birthday. After the wedding, I'll hand over all my money to you. You just need to transfer me a little pocket money every month." Looking at Thomas, who was trying so hard to play the perfect man, I only felt absurd. In my previous life, he didn't give me his salary card, not having even mentioned it. After we got married, he locked his bank account, guarding against me like I was a thief. When I was in the ICU, bleeding heavily and fighting for my life, his parents refused to pay a single cent. They even mocked me. "Just die already. You're a waste of money alive." It was my parents who sold their shop to get the money to save me. Later, when Thomas's parents were hospitalized and when we had their funerals, I maxed out all my credit cards to cover the costs. During the 20 years Thomas hid abroad, he kept in secret contact with our daughter. I guessed he'd also sent money to his parents. All I remembered was that before Thomas's mom died, she called my daughter into her ward alone. When the girl came out, there was greed and delight in her eyes. When we sorted through Thomas's mom's things after the funeral, her jewelry and bank cards were all gone. Later, I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. But I couldn't afford medicine, and I had to suffer through it alone. In my previous life, Thomas knew I was dying at that time. Our daughter held on to the huge sum of money her grandma left her, And yet, she just watched me suffer horribly and refused to give me a single cent. Thinking of all this, I suddenly felt a wave of nausea. Thomas saw how pale I was and how I was shaking all over. He hurried to reach out, wanting to help me. But I pushed him away hard. I gasped for breath for a long time. Before I calmed down, when I looked up at him again, my eyes were filled with nothing but bone-chilling cold. That look stabbed him right in the heart. Then, I stared down at the card. Since he'd volunteered to hand his money to me, of course, I'd take it. The debts from my previous life were too messy to settle, but the ones from this life? They had to be paid, down to the last cent, right in front of Thomas. I logged into online banking, pulled up a list of all the expenses, furniture for our new home, booking the wedding planner, everything. After I transferred exactly half of the money into my personal account, I threw the card back into his arms. Thomas stared at the debit alert on his phone, completely stunned, but he didn't dare say a word. My sudden, cold indifference towards him was so obvious that even a fool could tell something was wrong. He had no idea what went wrong, only that something was slipping completely out of his control. After making sure I was okay, he stumbled into the elevator, dazed. That night, I had a bad dream. I dreamed about my previous life. In my dream, I saw Thomas's parents telling Thomas the first was in the ICU. On the other end of the phone, he only hummed a single syllable as a response, flat and unconcerned. I also saw our daughter, just starting elementary school, with Thomas's mom teaching her to secretly video call Thomas. Thomas knew perfectly well I was going crazy looking for him, yet he colluded with his whole family to hide the truth from me. No wonder everyone in the circle who knew the truth avoided me like I was a plague. I also dreamed of my studio partner gossiping happily behind my back about the true love between Thomas and Alexandra. As for me, in their words, I was just a vicious, pitiful old hag. How ridiculous. I woke up in sharp pain, my pajamas soaked with cold sweat. After turning on the bedside lamp, I looked out at the neon lights flickering outside the window. Silently, I felt my strong, steady heartbeat. I was still alive and perfectly healthy. My life had already turned onto a new path, hadn't it? Over the next 2 days, I worked like crazy to wrap up and hand over my domestic business. Before I knew it, it was the weekend, the day of that big feast at the Riverside Villa. I originally didn't bother to go, but Alexandra sent me over a dozen WhatsApp messages in a row. I couldn't turn down such a warm invitation, could I? So I went. When it was time for dinner, I grabbed a bottle of champagne and headed upstairs. The door was slightly ajar. The second I pushed it open, my eyes fell on the spacious kitchen island. Thomas had Alexandra pinned against it. His hand was casually lifting the hem of her shirt, wandering somewhere it shouldn't be, hearing the sound of my high heels. Thomas spun around suddenly, his face paling. Alexandra, meanwhile, put on a frightened look, scrambling to jump down and button up her shirt. I didn't say a single word. I just turned around and walked out. Before the elevator even reached the first floor, Thomas came running down the fire escape like a madman. He grabbed my wrist in the hall, his eyes red with urgency. Cecilia, I can explain. It's not like what you saw between Alexa and me. I cut him off. What did I see? That you two were half-dressed, making out in our new home? Or that your hand accidentally slipped into her shirt? Over the past 2 days, my best friends had already filled me in on all the gossip. They told me a lot. Someone saw Alexandra deliberately rub her breasts against Thomas's arm, and he didn't even move away. He even smiled. Some others saw them sharing an iced Americano in the underground parking lot, and someone else saw Thomas pinching Alexandra's fingers gently in the office. Now, standing in front of me, Thomas looked like a complete mess. I really didn't get it. He'd done so many shameless things with Alexandra already, so why was he now begging me so pathetically not to misunderstand him? Did he want to play the same trick from my previous life? He wanted me to take care of his parents, while he continued his epic love with Alexandra behind my back. I looked at him, saying, before Alexandra showed up, "You never let any other woman sit in your passenger seat." But an hour after Alexandra appeared, you left me alone at City Hall and rushed her to the emergency room. Less than 3 hours after you met her, you let her sit in your passenger seat. No questions asked. Less than half a day after you met her, you took her to a light meal restaurant, laughing and chatting with her. Less than 7 hours after you met her, you let her move into the new house we bought for our marriage outright. You let her sleep in our bed and use the high-end silk sheets I had custom made. Less than a day after you met her, you spent thousands of dollars taking her to eat air-freighted premium beef. And also, less than a day after you met her, you, who can't even make simple pasta for me, cooked for her. You know her little tricks, yet you still fall for them. You shared a cup of coffee with her and flirted with her in the office. And now you're hugging and touching each other in my house. How dare you still swear to me that you two are completely innocent? Do you take me for an idiot? Every word I said hit Thomas like a slap in the face. He couldn't stop shaking, unable to say a single word in defense. Let me guess why you're so scared of me calling off the engagement, and why you're so desperate to explain. Even throwing a secondary card at me. The day we were supposed to get our marriage certificate, you fell for Alexandra, right? She faked a sprained ankle and ruined our plans, and you went along with it because you fell for her. You never wanted to get a marriage certificate with me. These past few hours, you've fallen deeper and deeper for her. You want to have your romantic fun with her. I stared at him coldly, continuing, but at the same time, you need a wife who's from a matching family and has outstanding abilities, someone to help you keep your parents in line and clean up your family's mess. And if that woman is willing to be your free housekeeper and nanny for the rest of her life, that's even better. Am I right? When I finished speaking, Thomas looked up suddenly, staring at me like he'd been shocked greatly, his eyes almost popping out. As I looked at his terrified face, a wave of sorrow washed over me. I'd actually die because of such a hypocrite in my previous life, but this time, I would never let this piece of trash ruin my life again. That night, I went back to my apartment and stuffed the last few pieces of clothes into my suitcase. Suddenly, my doorbell rang. It was Alexandra. The moment I opened the door, she dropped all pretense, staring at me with a venomous glare. "Cecilia, you're reborn with your memories too, aren't you?" I remained completely unfazed. She sneered, her eyes brimming with contempt and mockery. "So, what if you clung to the title of Mrs. Cameron in your previous life? You still ended up being a free maid for his stupid parents, didn't you? And the daughter you worked so hard to raise?" She called me mom behind your back. That's so laughable, isn't it? Your man is mine, and your daughter is mine too. Even if you're reborn, you still can't beat me, and I'll become Mrs. Cameron eventually. Even though I'd long written that ungrateful daughter off as dead in my heart, Alexandra's words still pained me. But fortunately, in this life, I'd never let that kind of ingrate come to this world. Alexandra prattled on, gloating like a rooster who'd just won a fight. But then, she realized that the only emotion in my eyes was pity and compassion towards her, no trace of anger at all. She fled in defeat. In my eyes, she was nothing but a pitiful fool who cherished trash like it was treasure. This time, I'd like to see if they could still live the high life without me covering for them. In the dead of night, as I couldn't sleep, I opened the door and went out to throw the trash. Suddenly, I tripped over a dark figure slumped against the door. It was Thomas, reeking of alcohol. I pulled out my phone right away and called Alexandra. Half an hour later, she arrived by taxi. Thomas was dead asleep, and Alexandra struggled to drag him toward the elevator. But I just watched coldly, not lifting a finger to help. Early the next morning, I pulled my suitcase and had a taxi send me to the airport. On the way, I stopped by the Riverside Villa to drop off the spare keys with the property manager. My bestie sent me a video. In the video, Thomas was half-dressed, livid with rage, pointing at Alexandra, who was crying while wrapped in a sheet. It turned out that after Alexandra dragged Thomas back last night, she thought about how he had chased after me during the day, and how he'd waited drunk outside my apartment door. She panicked completely. Taking advantage of his drunken stupor, she slept with him. This video made me sick. I slammed the keys on the front desk and pulled my suitcase toward the door. "Cecilia." My wrist was suddenly grabbed by Thomas, his eyes bloodshot. "Cecilia, I can explain." Was this scumbag only capable of saying that one line? I took a deep breath and stared at him with calm eyes. "Thomas, I think I made myself very clear yesterday." He tried to find a hint of lingering affection in my eyes, but he failed. All he saw was indifference, the kind reserved for complete strangers. I wasn't angry because I didn't care. He couldn't stir a single ripple of emotion in me anymore. He finally realized that I really didn't want him, not in the slightest. His fingers slowly loosened, and his hand dropped limply to his side. His voice was hoarse as he whispered, "I'm sorry." Sorry for what? Well, I didn't care anymore. I'd soon board the international flight to Milan, leaving the city behind for good. Before leaving, I stopped by home. When I looked at the table full of my favorite dishes and my healthy, robust parents, tears streamed down my face. I end the days since my rebirth. I always felt like there had been something heavy weighing on my heart. I'd been trapped by them for an entire lifetime. How could I truly let go of them peacefully? Even if I took my revenge on them in the cruelest way possible, it still couldn't quench my hatred completely. But I still had parents who loved me and a bright future ahead. I couldn't ruin my brilliant life for those two scumbags. After I hugged my healthy parents, I finally truly felt unburdened. I spent a few comfortable days at home. Then, I flew to Milan brimming with energy. Without any burdens holding me back, my talent exploded. In less than 6 months, I won a European Design Award and was promoted to Global Executive Director. I was also hired as a visiting professor by my alma mater, fulfilling the dream I'd once had. A full year later, I heard about Thomas's things again. In the end, Alexandra used the baby in her belly as leverage to get Thomas to marry her. After the wedding, they moved into that riverside villa. But Thomas's parents moved in too. Those two old folks were never easy to deal with. In my previous life, even though I brought a substantial amount into the marriage, they still treated me like I was out to steal from them. So how could they ever accept Alexandra, a girl with nothing to her name? Thomas's parents found all sorts of ways to boss Alexandra around, and the villa was never at peace ever since. Chaos reigned from morning till night. Thomas tried to pay his parents to leave, but they refused point-blank. In their eyes, Alexandra was just a gold digger who'd married above her station. They insisted on staying in the villa and treating her like their maid. Alexandra's beauty slowly wore away in the endless war with her and laws. As time went on, all Thomas felt for the unkempt Alexandra was annoyance. Gradually, he found that she was just another screaming shrew. A few months later, Thomas volunteered to take charge of the project in Africa and left without taking Alexandra with him. It was said that Alexandra finally lost her temper completely. She got into a huge fight with Thomas's parents, smashing everything in the villa into pieces and becoming a laughingstock in their social circle. Later, I heard Thomas got a young female translator as his new mistress in Africa. Alexandra went totally crazy. She marched straight into the shareholders' meeting with some test results and sued Thomas, accusing him of getting her drunk and raping her, a fresh graduate. Sure enough, anyone who'd willingly be a homewrecker was never a pushover. The funniest part of all was Thomas. In my previous life, he'd been devastated over Alexandra's memorial portrait, and he fell apart when I called off our engagement. But now that he'd actually married her, there was still no sign of his so-called undying love. It turned out that I'd still overestimated him. He was just a man rotten to the core, and he only ever loved himself. What he'd been obsessed with was just the thrill of chasing something he couldn't have. Lucky for me, this time, I'd completely broken free from that messy quagmire. Now, I stood in the warm sunshine on the streets of Milan. And my life? It was blooming like a field of flowers, heading straight toward the light. The end. Have you liked the story? Write your reviews and comments. Thank you.